Hey guys, we're gonna get started. And again, if anybody has a bill hearing or whatever, that feel free to do what you got to do. Why don't we start with Senate Bill 222? Let's just go right to April and Senator Augustine's Bill 222.
Right. Senate Bill 222, Environment, Reducing Packaging Materials, Producer Responsibility. So this bill establishes a required framework for producers of packaging materials to create and implement a producer responsibility plan for affected products. Producer responsibility organizations must register annually with the Department of the Environment beginning July 1st, 2024. The department must conduct a statewide recycling needs assessment by April 1st, 2025. Producer responsibility plans must be submitted by each producer either individually or as part of a producer responsibility organization to the department for review and approval by April 1st, 2026. Beginning on a date set by the department, a producer may not sell, offer for sale, distribute, or import for sale or distribution packaging materials for use in the state unless the producer has an approved plan on file with the department. Bill also establishes an advisory council, an ongoing statewide recycling needs assessment requirement for the department, reporting requirements, and penalties for violations. The department must adopt implementing regulations. There are amendments, and we did send these out a little bit earlier today to your emails, but they're also in the separate sort of document, should be on your desk. I will just flag there are two small changes from the document that was sent earlier today, just in response to some stakeholder feedback that was received. But I'm going to walk through what the amendments do, but just to sort of recap, big picture, what this bill is proposing to do is first, there's a part of the bill requiring this needs assessment for recycling in the state generally, and then setting up this structure where primarily manufacturers and brand owners that use packaging are joining a producer responsibility organization. That organization is coming up with a plan to set targets for sort of packaging materials, recyclability rates, recycling rates, and then having that plan sort of have the oversight and approval of the department. That's sort of the basic structure of what we're talking about here. So beginning in Senator Augustine's amendments, the first change has to do with the definition of, yes, it says offered by Senator Augustine at the top. So on page 2, this is just pulling in an existing definition of organics recycling, but amending the definition so that organics recycling clearly covers also compostable packaging materials, because this term was used throughout the bill, and there was some question just to make sure it's very clear that we're also talking about packaging materials that could be composted or subject to anaerobic digestion. The next change is that the amendments would require the needs assessment to be conducted by an independent consultant. And it also requires the assessment to include some additional information. So those changes are on pages 4 through 5 and 6 of the reprint. So those additional pieces of the assessment would include an analysis of the state's current solid waste streams, an evaluation of the economic opportunities in the state's recycling system, an analysis of the costs and benefits of implementing an extended producer responsibility program, an analysis of the potential environmental impact of an extended producer responsibility program, recommendations on the best practices to follow for the successful extended producer responsibility programs in other states. And then based off of the data collected under this needs assessment, a recommendation for reasonable reimbursement rates, and that comes into play later under these plans. Part of the plans is to come up with a structure for the producer responsibility organization to be collecting fees from the member organizations and then distributing that to local jurisdictions to offset the cost of operating local recycling programs. The next change, this is on, first appears on page 7, would strike language in the bill specific to beverage containers, including a provision that would have authorized a producer responsibility organization to establish a bottle deposit program. So the definition is struck on page 7. The bottle deposit language is on page 12. And then there was some reporting requirements specific to beverage containers on pages 25 and 26. So this would they would still be covered as a type of packaging material, but the bill would not be dealing with them sort of separately from other packaging materials. Next change is on page 8 of the bill. Again, we're in the definitions section. This adds definitions of materials recycling facility, organics recycling and organics recycling facility, and packaging material waste for purposes of the bill. And I will flag, this is one of the 2 minor differences from what was sent earlier. This definition of materials recycling facility has been refined a little bit with the input of the Department of the Environment, the Maryland Recycling Network, and Trash Free Maryland to sort of really get at the types of facilities that are handling these recyclable products. Next change, also on page 8 of the bill, having to do with some of the exemptions for which packaging materials that are exempt from the bill. This would exempt packaging for federally regulated dietary supplements. So the bill already exempted federally regulated medical devices and drugs. This would add dietary supplements to that list. Then also exempts refillable propane gas containers. Next changes appear on page 12. So these changes clarify that the bill does not prohibit a local government or other entity from selling recycled materials or compost to end markets and retaining revenues, does not affect the authority of a materials recycling facility or organics recycling facility to determine which entities may use the facility, and does not limit the ability of local government materials recycling facilities or organics recycling facilities to make decisions regarding recycling infrastructure purchases, including processing equipment. Next changes are on pages, starting on page 12, but then also going on to page 13. This change would actually provide initially for a single producer responsibility organization to sort of be carrying out this program. The original bill envisioned that there could be multiple producer responsibility organizations. This would at least start with a single producer responsibility organization, but then allow, beginning in 2030, the Department of the Environment to approve the designation of additional organizations if they felt like that would improve recycling or would better cater to the needs of particular types of packaging materials. Next change is on page 14. This language specifies that a producer is not required to submit a producer responsibility plan if another entity has agreed to assume responsibility for the producer's packaging under the bill. This is to deal with situations where you might have had a multiple people who would potentially could be responsible for this. The bill says as long as one person is sort of taking responsibility for that packaging or material, participating in the producer responsibility organization, has the plan in place, that can sort of be negotiated between the different parties. Next change is also on page 14. This applies a requirement in the bill that producer responsibility plans achieve a 25% reduction in packaging material waste for each packing material. It applies that required reduction across all of the participating producers collectively instead of to each producer individually. On pages 17 through 18, some changes that clarify language around reimbursements from producer responsibility organizations to local governments for costs associated with local recycling services. On pages 21 and 22, so this is getting out of the part of the bill that deals with the producer responsibility organization and the plan that they have to come up with, and the reimbursements to local governments, and talking about this. The idea is to create a producer responsibility plan advisory council made up of various stakeholders that would be sort of helping the department to review these plans and making recommendations on the contents of the plans and how this program gets carried out. The amendments on page 21 and 22 specify that both public and private sector recycling collectors and recycling processors should be represented on the advisory council, and prohibits a representative from a producer from serving as a voting member or co-chair of the advisory council. The bill, as introduced, had already prohibited a representative from that producer responsibility organization, but this would get also at the people who are actually, producing or using the packaging materials. Finally, on the last pages of the bill, there's some changes to the penalty provisions. So first, and this is on page 27 of the reprint, clarifies that certain penalties in the bill are intended to be administrative penalties and provides that each day after a specified 60-day notice period that a violation continues must be considered a separate violation. So that's for the sort of general catch-all language that has to do with any violation of this subtitle, of these requirements, regulations adopted under this bill, et cetera. There is also a penalty in the original bill for a producer responsibility organization that fails to meet the annual targets that it has set in its own plans, essentially. Initially, the maximum, or the original bill said the maximum fine was $5,000. That would be annually, so because it's based off of that annual report. The amendments proposed to raise that maximum to $250,000. And that's it. That's the bill.
Okay, Senator Augustine, you want to add commentary here?
I do. I just want to, first of all, I want to thank April for really, helping to sort of form these things. I also want to thank all the stakeholders who participated in really making this a much, I think, stronger product. We took a lot of, this bill started from a place of a lot of work of stakeholders last March, and that was our starting point. And we've continued to work on it. We had a very productive stakeholder meeting last week. A couple of members were there, got a chance to participate in that. We've taken some of those additional changes in that feedback to get to the product that we have here that I think is very, balanced. It still gets to what we are trying to do, which is to encourage people to make sure that the incentives are aligned, that the people who are making decisions for packaging have an incentive to do better, and that we have an overall goal of having this far greater circular economy that's better for all of the things that we've talked about, and having that alignment of who is paying for that, and also just acknowledging that it's a shared responsibility, and so that it will take a percentage, 50% of those recycling costs that we already have to pay for right now. I mean, as Marylanders. So I think it's very, very thoughtful. And I would absolutely move the amendment.
Yes, Senator Hester.
I was going to second the amendments if that's
Okay.
appropriate.
Yes, it's.
And then I did have a
Then we
question.
can, yeah,
April did not mention is that Senator Hester is now second on this bill.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion, a second discussion about the amendments, questions for the sponsor for April on the amendments. Go ahead. Yes, Senator Hester, and then we'll go to Senator Simon.
So, and I would like to, you thanked everybody. I would like to thank you for your hard work on this bill for 2 years now. It's awesome. My question was, I received an email from MDE, and they mentioned that on page 5, section 8, this is duplicative of what the department is currently doing under HB 164. What is that? That's probably not in the reprint, or can you just tell me what they were saying was duplicative?
So their concern was that the language around the evaluation of economic opportunities in the recycling system was duplicative of there is some language in that prior bill that requires that similar information to be included in the annual recycling report that they produce. And I can let.
This, we put in, it was going to be a third party.
Exactly.
Right.
And
That was
so
my point.
that's where that's how it's going to be different, Senator. So it's different, and that's how we knew that the third party, which is separate, is going to do this. So it's going to give us another layer of information, and it's not the information that the department would have. It doesn't hurt, nor is it duplicative, because it's a part of what we, with your amendment, are doing from the outside in.
Speaking, I had the opportunity to meet those, the people virtually over the interim, meet the staff in our Department of Environment, Recycling, Market, whatever department it is that Senator Kagan, passed 2 years ago. They're doing excellent work. There's only 2 of them. And so, I mean, they're responsible for this study. And so that was one of the reasons I pushed for the independent, persons. I just wanted to make sure that was.
That's why it's that
stayed.
way.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Additional questions for the sponsor for April on the amendments. We have a motion and a second. We have Senator Simon.
Yeah, just getting back up to 30,000. So, and tell me if I'm off base on this, but currently the county now recycles and they can make some money from it. It costs some money to do it. And then this producer responsibility organization is going to come in and they're going to pay a fee to the locals. Is that to make them neutral as far as if the county costs $1 million after it's said and done, they will pay $1 million to. Okay, so
Costs associated with the item is how the bill's set up.
okay, gotcha.
Love it.
Okay, and then you mentioned incentives. What incentives were you referencing?
Like you said, right? So if the county, it's net. So if the county is able to sell the item, right, and therefore drop down the cost associated with it, then it'll be lower as well for the manufacturer. So if they, going back to the hearing, if they choose to use material that's recyclable, then we have, it'll cost everybody less. If they choose to, because they want to, they can still do it. If they choose to not use something that's recyclable, therefore it costs us all more money, then their fee will be higher.
Okay,
Because our overall costs are going to be higher.
okay. And then as far as how you get them in this organization, is it anybody that does business in Maryland, either locally or they ship things into our state? They have to register with the state saying we are sending this type of material. What's the requirement to get them in an organization?
the definition of who is a producer. That's what you're asking, right?
And then they would
And
be
the
required to
producer,
register.
yeah, that's correct. So we have the definition of producer. She's getting to that, which talks about those who are manufacturing, selling, distributing, like that's in our definition in our state. I mean, there are some certain exceptions, but that's like the big one. But go ahead, April. And
So it's page 10 of the bill, and the reprint is who is considered a producer for the purposes of this. It is primarily it is brand owners. So I'm not going to mention any particular brands, but you get the idea, because they're ultimately typically the ones that have the kind of final decision making on what type of packaging they are using. And then it says if there is no person described in this paragraph, so basically if there's no brand owner located within the United States, the producer of the packaging material is the person that imports the item into the United States, so the importer. So if there's no brand owner in the US, it's the importer. And that's for things that are being sold, physically in stores in the state. Generally, it's the same for things that are being distributed being sold into the state only online. But it can also be the producer of the packaging materials used to ship the item to the consumer. That person would be subject to this as well.
Okay, so I appreciate that. So is the concept here, you're basically shifting the cost burden from the taxpayer to the consumer? I mean, is that what we're?
no, it's not that it's, well, first of all, consumers and taxpayers, obviously, all of that is there. What we are trying to do is make it such that the brand owners, the people who are making the decisions on what that packaging is, have an incentive to do it better overall, because right now they don't. Like right now, they simply just do it however, and then we end up having to either pay for it with the waste disposal, and if we can do the recycling, great. But there's no incentive right now for them to participate in the process. So what this is really trying to do is trying to say, hey, let's have a shared responsibility for it. And so it costs if you do better with what you're doing, it drops the whole cost for everybody down. And we want to try to make it as circular as possible. So that's really what this is there to do. Understanding that right now through through our taxpayers and through our recycling right now, we are paying for the whole thing as it stands.
You talk about a whole as an organization. If I'm company X and I make up 1/1000th.
Yep.
I don't see really a deduction in my fees because I'm such a small part. Is there anything required of the whole organization, or is it dependent? Is it envisioned that each individual will be incentivized if they make their little part, that hopefully others will do it and eventually it'll make?
So it's two things. One, we do have exemptions in there for small business. Let's just start with that. So it's like, we're trying to get to the big brands. Let's just, we've got that for both the size by how much they spend, to make sure. I just want to say that. So we're not trying to do that. That's the first thing. And repeat your question, because I just want to make sure I said.
So basically you have an organization, let's say 100 of the biggest companies.
Okay, yeah, that was the second part of that, Senator. So we made the change that it's the collective of the entire plan, right? So we're trying to reach goals. We're going to set goals and their overall goals. So, but that each one who does have a choice to make and they have to have the ability to do that in order to be considered a producer, that they are the ones who can make a change. They can make a difference. That's who it's really targeted towards. It's not targeted to, and there's only going to be one. We heard clarification on that. As far as who qualifies to just be the person who can really ultimately has the responsibility to make a decision about the packaging.
Targeted to individual companies to get the incentive.
Yes, sir. But it's been measured as a whole,
right,
for the organization.
Okay, Senator Gallion.
Yes, thank you. So on the amendments, two questions. The first, you brought up about bringing different stakeholders together to
Yes.
try to work things out.
Yes.
So I was, and forgive me, it's been over a month. I'm trying to get reacclimated with pretty big bill. So like with the different ones that were those the favorable with amendments or like unfavorable was like Maryland Forest and Paper Association and the Chamber of Commerce. Were they involved and
First of all, everybody was invited.
okay?
Not everybody came, okay? But everybody was invited. And we did work for those who did come, there were a number of the requests that we were able to do. Speaking specifically about just the American Forest and their requests, just to be clear, so the way that other producer responsibility folks are set up, some of them include all of paper as a product. Okay, they include in these producer responsibility organizations all of paper. So that it means it's paper as a product and paper as a packaging. But this is a packaging bill. So this is a packaging bill. So what the compromise in here in this one, because this is a compromise. We have received real push because they are a part of the recycling stream that all of paper be included. But we said, no, this is a packaging one. So when paper is packaging, it should be treated in the same way. Folks have the opportunity to make decisions on their packaging, whether or not they should use paper or they should use something else. And so that's why that remains included as one of the items as a packaging material, just like others in this piece of legislation.
Since it's more focused on the packaging.
Yes, sir.
Did they end up removing their opposition? Do you know?
No, they did not remove their opposition because what they're saying is that, well, we already recycle. This is what their argument. I mean, it's fair. I understand that. Like we already do a lot of recycling with paper. That's fair. But we still, taxpayers, Marylanders, we still are the ones who have to pay when we put the stuff in the blue bin, right? Including the paper. We got to pay the hauler to take it to the spot, right? To get it there. We got to pay to then, get it baled and everything else to be able to be sent back to them. And right now there's no incentive. We still are the ones who just get that bill. And so I just think that it doesn't make sense for us to not include that when right now we're not able to get a recovery. There's no incentive right now. Again, try to align incentives. There's no incentive right now for them to do anything different. This bill puts them in there. But the good news is that because of their high level of recyclability, the amount in the eco-modulation that's in the legislation, which says that if you are doing a better job of what you're doing, your fees and stuff are less, right? Your fees are going to be less. Their numbers will be lower as far as that goes. So that's why I think it just makes sense for them to be in there.
Okay, and then one other question, near the end of the amendment pack, the penalty went from 5,000 to 250,000.
It did.
So how did you come up with that number? It seems like a huge number.
It is, and I want to explain why, how that came about. So the reason that came about, Senator, is, understand that it's a penalty not for a single company, right? Which is kind of like the way that I think that it was at first it was thought of. This is not a penalty for the single company. This is a penalty for the producer responsibility organization as a whole. And it's associated with the goal, which is also associated with the whole. So it's everybody, okay? So think about, we got all these big brands in there and everything else. And so it needs to be a number that they just aren't going to say as a cost of doing business. We're just not going to do it. We're just not going to do it. It needs to be something that's a meaningful amount of money, such that we make sure that the folks are able and will participate in the program.
Just one follow up on that. So this is based off this annual report. So that would be $250,000. It could be every year then.
If they don't meet,
they don't
meet it,
Okay.
that is correct. But it's only annually, right?
Right.
It's not like anything other than annually.
Yeah, Senator Kagan.
Thank you. Senator Gallion asked one of my questions, which was 5,000 to 250 as well. And I totally support this, and Senator Hester referenced our bill to ban styrofoam, and Maryland was the first state in the country. So this is the obvious, like, also urgently needed. My questions are unrelated to the others that have been asked. I'm on page 21 with the Producer Responsibility Plan Advisory Council. I just had a few questions. So I love oversight and accountability. And so I think this is effective for that. And I like the people who are on this. I just had questions. Page 22, lines 9 through 14, at least one representative, at least two. So it could be 200, it could be 12, it could be. So I've never seen language in a board or oversight group that's at least. That seemed unexpected. So was there a reason for that?
I don't have a specific answer to you on that, Senator. I mean, you feel like that is too.
I think it's really open. I think environmental advocacy organizations obviously should be at the table, environmental justice advocacy, and two members, and members of the public, all good. But it seems to me that if we're looking for diversity, I don't think we should have a thumb on the scale for any organizations that could outnumber, outshout, outvote, anyway, I just think maybe, Mr. Sponsor, do you want to pick one or two or five or something?
No, what I would like to do is to actually, I mean, these are things that have been agreed to over the last 2 years.
Yep.
With the stakeholders, as far as like who would be the composition of the council. And so, if you feel strongly that you feel like this is problematic to you and you'd like to change it, I mean, I would actually like for it to stay the way that it is, given the fact that we did work hard to get to this. But do you feel strongly like that you want to change it?
So in general, we want to make sure that all the right people are in the room, right? At
Yes.
the table, and that everyone's voices are heard.
Right.
I think hypothetically, if any one category came in with 100 people, they would be able to shout down any other representatives. And that doesn't seem, and I'm not suggesting that could happen or would happen. No, I'm not saying it would happen, but it could happen. And so I just think from a fairness, it makes more sense. And other groups, other oversight groups.
Well,
The
the
numbers
thing
are much
is,
more
the thing is
specific.
that the secretary is the one who puts it together. And
Yes.
so the secretary, I would imagine, wouldn't, do what you're talking about. If you look further down on page 22,
Yep.
you'll see how this is constituted and how it comes about. And you'll see that it is the secretary who has the responsibility, and we give certain
Yep.
parameters to the secretary that what I would imagine would be able to make sure that what you're suggesting would not occur.
I
Can I
understand
just
that. The
interject?
other thing-
April, I think, has been eager to weigh in on this.
No, I was just
Yeah.
gonna say just that, just as written, it gives the Secretary of the Environment broad leeway in constituting this advisory council in a way that they think makes sense. It sort of put the floor on who we expect to be there, but it doesn't. But I was just gonna point out the same thing.
Okay,
Senator
yeah.
Augustine did.
Thank you, April. I don't love it, but on lines 25 and 26, the secretary is going to pick the co-chairs. And again, you're taking one group out that can't be a co-chair, but it could be the same group. It could be one of the, at least, it could be two nonprofits, two environmental justice, two members of the public. I'm used to seeing stuff that's tighter. I also don't see anything about term limits. So once someone's appointed, the normal language of they serve terms of X and until there's a vacancy and there's someone new appointed. Is it your assumption that as long as the secretary has appointed that person kind of stays for forever? And then the last question that I had on this, I see that they meet at least quarterly. It doesn't have any sunset. Is this an in perpetuity oversight group? And will there be like interest 30 years from now or 100 years from now or something? So those were my questions, and I'm happy to take your thoughts either now or later.
So do you have, what do you, I mean, do you have something specific that you are saying that, okay, so what is that?
I'm kind of nodding, shaking, which is the boilerplate language that says, you know, they serve a term of X years and then they continue to serve until a new person is appointed. I mean, there's sort of boilerplate language, but this is your bill and it's your issue. So I wouldn't presume to say whether that's a 4-year term or some other number. But
right.
in perpetuity, no terms is just not what I'm used to
Okay,
seeing.
I mean, we did try to provide the flexibility to the secretary to do it, but I'm certain that if
Well,
we
here
put
we
a
have a
4-year
couple
term.
we have a couple ways of handling this, but Senator Hester wanted to weigh in and then maybe a couple have maybe some suggestions.
I was just going to try to broker a compromise. I was thinking that since the language about who's on the committee has been negotiated over the past couple of years, that maybe it would be easiest, you could say something around when the secretary appoints them, you know, we've got the geographic, the large and small, the variability. I mean, maybe there could be a number 4 that says something about maintaining the balance among the stakeholders.
Well, the one thing is that, you know, we got to be careful. I know we did some conceptual amendments, you know, yesterday. Rather than going that route, what I might suggest is if this bill were to move out of the committee between now and when we get to the floor tomorrow, or to, you know, we could have a floor amendment. You know what I mean? I'd hate to just go back and forth with some conceptual ideas that aren't quite, that seems a little sloppy. I think the cleaner thing would be is Senator Kagan's raised some issues. And
More than happy to work with you on that, and we can do that, particularly following the chair's lead. Does that work
and
for
then,
you?
you know, between now, you know, come to the floor with a
Yes.
floor amendment on these issues and
Is that-
then,
Can we do that?
you know, that
Okay,
seems-
very good. I am. Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
cheerleader.
Okay, I got
Yeah.
it. Yep.
Okay.
All
Okay,
right.
so we have a couple members not here, but you know, they're in other hearings, as I say. We can't just sort of stop the business of the committee while that's the case. So on these bigger bills, I'm most comfortable just doing some roll calls even on the amendments. So on this one, we do have a motion
Yep.
on the amendments and a favorable. Any further discussion on just on the amendments right now? Okay, let's do a roll call on that, and understanding we do have 2 members absent, but starting with Senator Kagan and Lamore.
Senator Kagan,
Aye.
Senator Kagan, yes. Senator Augustine, is this the amendment?
Just on the.
Yeah.
Okay, 1 second, I'm sorry. All right, Senator Kagan, yes, on the amendment. Senator Augustine,
Yes.
Senator Augustine, yes. Senator Watson. Senator, I'm sorry, Senator Gallion.
Now.
Senator Gallion, no. Senator Watson. Senator Watson, yes. Senator Lewis Young.
Yes.
Senator Lewis Young, yes. Senator Brooks.
Yeah.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Hester.
Yes.
Senator Hester, yes. Senator Salmonair.
No.
Senator Salmonair, no. And Senator Feldman.
Yes, so the amendments carry. Now we
The
are on
bill
the
as
bill.
amended.
Second.
A second from Senator Kagan. Discussion on the bill as amended. Okay, seeing none, we'll just do a roll call on the bill as amended. Yep. Okay, does anybody want to be a co-sponsor? Raise your hand. Okay, we've got. Okay, well, I'll go on here too. So we've got Brooks, Hester, myself, Kagan, Watson,
you,
Lewis
colleagues.
Young. Okay, we've got that sponsor amendment. Now back on the bill as amended.
All right, Senator,
August, yes, go on.
sorry, Senator Kagan.
Aye.
Senator Kagan, yes. Senator Augustine.
Yes.
Senator Augustine, yes. Senator Gallion. Senator Gallion, no. Senator Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Watson, yes. Senator Lewis Young.
Yeah.
Senator Lewis Young, yes. Senator Brooks.
Yes.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Hester.
Yes.
Senator Hester, yes. Senator Salmonair.
Take some time to look at it. I'm just gonna pass.
Senator Salmonair is abstained. Senator Feldman.
Yes.
Senator Feldman, yes.
Okay, bill as amended, Bill 222 passes. We'll go back to you. 223, Senator Augustine, this is Alexis's bill.
Senate Bill 223, state government, state facilities, changes and closures, procedures. This bill establishes requirements for a principal department in the executive branch, those units to comply with when closing a state facility, the definition of which is modified to apply to facilities which accommodate at least 25 employees. The bill alters the requirements for when a department seeks to change the use, purpose, or function of a state facility. For changing the use of a facility, a department is required to give specific notice within 90 days prior to a hearing or 30 days prior to a hearing, depending on the notice recipient. For closing a facility, a hearing is required and notice is required within 180 days. Additionally, a report is required justifying the closure. The bill establishes certain criteria for the contents of the report. There are sponsor amendments which change that change justifying the closure under the contents of the report to explaining the closure. They authorize the modification of those timelines in the event of an emergency, so long as notice is rendered as soon as possible or at the earliest point. And additionally, within that report that's required, plans have to be considered for assisting those patients, clients, or inmates that have been impacted by the closure.
Okay, Senator Augustine, anything you want to add?
The amendments.
Can we get a motion to move the amendments? Second, Senator Gallion. All in favor of the amendments, raise your hand. All opposed, amendments carry. Got a bill on the table.
Move the bill as amended.
For second, Senator Kagan.
Right.
All in favor, Senate Bill 223 as amended, raise your hand. Okay, that carries. Next up, Senator Gallion, April 262.
Senate Bill 262, Environment On-Farm Composting Facilities Permit Exemption. This bill requires the Maryland Department of the Environment to establish an exemption by regulation for the permitting requirements under COMAR for an on-farm composting facility that one uses 40,000 square feet of area or less for active food scrap composting, two, compost only one or more of specified list of feedstocks, three, records the amount and sources of feedstocks composted, and four, meets any other conditions specified in regulation. Bill also establishes several related definitions. There are amendments in your bill or in your voting packet. So the reprint of those amendments starts on page 7. The amendments themselves start on page 5. These amendments are being offered by Senator Gallion, the bill's sponsor. The amendments add a definition of active food scrap composting and alter the definition of off-site type 2 feedstock. They also establish requirements for new composting facilities operating under the permit exemption, reduce the area that may be used for active food scrap composting from 40,000 feet to 10,000 square feet, alter record-keeping requirements in the bill to apply only to off-site type 2 source-separated organics. So basically food scraps as opposed to manure and things like that. Requires the department to conduct an analysis of the impact of on-farm composting facilities in the state on or before December 1st, 2028. Adds uncodified language specifying that the bill is not intended to supersede regulations applicable to on-farm composting facilities operating under current permit exemptions. And requires the department to require the operator of a farm to provide written notice before conducting on-farm composting without a permit in accordance with the bill's requirements.
Okay, Senator Gallion, you want to add something?
Sure. So we passed this bill last year out of the Senate unanimously with the 40,000 square feet. It ran in some headwinds, getting on a voting list or anything in the House, but there were some issues that MDE, honestly, quite frankly, wasn't happy with, but we got it to a point now where they've signed off on it. I forwarded the email to April to confirm that. So it takes it down to that, 10,000, but for smaller area farms that are already at 5,000, they're not going to get extra regulations thrown on them if they stay at that number. So in other words, what it is now for them would stay that way. That was that uncodified language that she spoke about pretty late. I don't know if she's here. Emily Ranson has just been a champion, worked so hard on this bill. Honestly, if there's questions on it, she'd be a lot better at answering than me. So she is here. But between her and we've been in constant contact with the House sponsor, Delegate Shetty. You know, it's been a kind of a 2-year thing we've been working on. And honestly, I wasn't too awful pleased with the 5-year study. I thought that was too long, but you know what? That was kind of the last sticking point with MDE. And to get a pretty decent bill through, I was willing to compromise. I would have rather seen that be 3, but we'll go with the 5 to get everybody on board.
Okay, you're gonna move those amendments?
Yes, like to move the
There's a
amendments.
second on those Gallion amendments. Augustine is the second. Discussion about the amendments or questions for the sponsor or for anybody else for that matter. Seeing none, all in favor of the amendments, raise your hand. All opposed, the amendments carry. We've got 262 in front of us as amended. Is there a motion? Senator Gallion, Senator Augustine, all in favor, Senate Bill 262 as amended. 262 as amended carries. Next up, Senate Bill 300, Stacy.
Senate Bill 300, Baltimore City Young Readers Program Expansion and Alterations. This bill alters the Baltimore City Young Readers Program by expanding its focus to a statewide program. The Maryland State Library Agency, rather than the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, will administer the program along with the Young Readers Matching Grant Program. The bill requires the governor to include $500,000 rather than $250,000 in the annual budget bill for the grant program. Additionally, the bill authorizes public libraries to apply for program grants under the matching grant program and requires all grant applicants to prioritize the distribution of books to children in low-income zip codes within the applicant's area of service. By December 1, 2024, and every year thereafter, the Maryland State Library Board must report to the General Assembly on the effectiveness of the Young Readers Matching Grant Program and collect statistics and other information necessary for this purpose. There are no amendments, and B&T has approved this.
Okay, we have a bill clean, Senate Bill 300. Any questions for Stacy?
I just have a question.
Yes, Senator Washington.
Just about the allocation, was that existing law or is the budget allocation,
The existing allocation was $250,000 per year. Moving it to statewide, they're increasing it by doubling it to $500,000.
And it's a shall, not a may?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, any additional questions on Senate Bill 300? There are no amendments. Is there a motion? Move the bill. Senator Brooks, favorable. Senator Gallion, second. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, SB 300 carries. Let's just don't get off. There's a couple on here that really, I would characterize it as low hanging fruit. I'm thinking specifically Senator Watson's bill, like we heard yesterday. Right, exactly. Senate Bill 886, Stacy, remind us of the bill here
Sure.
yesterday.
Senate Bill 886, Higher Education Edward T. Conroy Memorial Scholarship Program, Surviving Spouses of Service Members. This bill expands the circumstances under which surviving spouses of members of the U.S. Armed Forces are eligible to apply to the Edward T. Conroy Memorial Scholarship Program. Under the bill, a surviving spouse is eligible if the service member, 1, died as a result of military service after December 7th, 1941, or 2, was declared to be a prisoner of war or missing in action as a result of the Vietnam conflict. As under current law, a surviving spouse of a service member who suffered a service-connected 100% permanent disability continues to be eligible regardless of the date of disability. An applicant must be a resident of Maryland at the time of application or at the time of the disabling or fatal event. There are no amendments.
Okay, there are no amendments. Senator Watson, do you have a motion? Okay, motion second. Senate Bill 886, no amendments, clean. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, 886 carries. Why don't we go down to the end there, Senator Gazzoni's bill, Senate Bill 913, Stacy?
All right, I'm not sure this is low hanging fruit. but
Okay, well,
I'll look
let's
for it.
forget, no, let's stop there. Okay, how about 649, Senator Elfreth? 649, State Government Regulation Procedures in the Maryland Registry. That's you, Alexis?
No, that's me. Senate Bill 649. State Government Regulation Procedures in the Maryland Register. This bill requires the Department of Legislative Services to adopt procedures for the submission of regulations, evaluation reports, and work plans by a unit that promulgates them. The bill requires the proposed regulations to be submitted in accordance with new procedures adopted and to submit the proposed regulations to AELR. Department of Legislative Services, and the Administrator of the Division of State Documents. The bill establishes procedures for modifying proposed regulations if the text is substantially different from the original proposed regulation. The bill clarifies that submission under the established Department of Legislative Services provisions do not satisfy publication requirements separately in the Maryland Register. Finally, the bill requires the Administrator of the Division of State Documents to develop and maintain an electronic filing system for the tracking of these regulations. And additionally, it requires the Administrator of the Division of State Documents to report to the AELR Committee on the status of this system by December 31st, 2023. There are a few sponsor amendments. So it removes the need for the text to be substantially different upon modification, and instead the change will be triggered if the text is different broadly. On the maintenance of the electronic filing system, it requires the Department of Information and Technology to consult with the Administrator of the Division of State Documents and DLS on the development and functionality, and requires to do it to submit that report originally established in the bill.
Any question on those amendments? Seeing none, anybody want to move the amendments? Move favorable on the amendments, second from Senator Washington. All in favor of the amendment, raise your hand. All opposed? Any motion on the bill as amended? Senator Washington, Senator Kagan. Okay, we've got Senate Bill 649 as amended. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? 649 carries. What about the next one down, Stacy? Senate Bill 791.
Senate Bill 791, primary and secondary education, public school employees, job duties and salaries. The bill generally aligns the salary requirements for certificated public school employees who are not eligible for salary increases under the Blueprint for Maryland's Future due to their subject matter not having a national board certification standard by establishing an alternative high-quality educator credential as further specified in the bill. Initial potential salary increases take effect as early as fiscal 2024, subject to the approval of the career ladder by the Accountability and Implementation Board and approval of the alternative high-quality educator credentials. Further, by July 1, 2026, or fiscal 27, the minimum salary for all certificated public school employees must be $60,000. Further, the bill alters requirements related to career ladder for educators by altering the classroom duty and teacher activity requirements for an assistant principal, and to repealing the requirement that a local board of education select a distinguished teacher or professor distinguished teacher to write curriculum assessment items and model lessons. There is one amendment. It's on page 49 of your packet with a reprint beginning on page 50. This amendment strikes all the provisions relating to the alternative high-quality educator credential and salary requirements and enhancements. Further, it clarifies that the instructional duties of an assistant principal on the career ladder, and though I will point out that some language was left out of the amendment, and that language would clarify that the provisions related to assistant principals teaching time are not meant to be interpreted as meaning an assistant teacher is to be considered a teacher of record. So that should be considered part of the amendment language. And finally, it provides that the requirement that county boards select an expert to write curriculum and assessment items from certain teachers on the career ladder doesn't begin until when the career ladder has been determined to be well established throughout the state by the Accountability and Implementation Board.
Okay, any discussion of that single amendment? Senator Gallion, you had a question?
So I was just looking through the fiscal note on the original bill, and it says, and I just want to see if anything was addressed with amendments that would help this. It says, as early as FY24, local school system expenditures increase meaningfully up to $17,000 per qualified educator to implement the required salary increases.
So yes, the amendment strikes all those provisions that would increase locals because it relates to the salary and the salary enhancement. So all that is stricken from the bill, and those provisions in the fiscal note would no longer apply.
Any additional questions? Okay, anybody want to move that one amendment? Yes, Senator Washington.
Thank you. So what's left?
So it makes some modifications to the duties of assistant principals who are on the career ladder. The language, let me here, find it, on page 49 here.
Did it say to
It just,
participate in classroom activity involving direct interactions with students?
yes.
That's the bill?
Well, there's two parts. Let me find it on the thing here. Okay. So the provisions she's referencing are on page 54 of your packet. So it strikes the existing requirement that an assistant principal who's on the career ladder teach in a classroom for at least 20% of their working hours. The bill has come in, said they had to participate in classroom activity involving direct interactions for that 20%. The bill is amended would say they must lead academic instruction for students in a classroom, small groups, or a one-on-one interaction for at least 20% of their working hours. The second part is lower down here, where instead of striking the requirement that a local education agency have an expert to write curriculum and assessment items and develop model lessons, be from this group of distinguished teachers and professor distinguished teacher tiers on the career ladder, that essentially we're saying, no, these provisions that they only have to use these experts from the career ladder be only after the career ladder has been determined to be well established throughout the state. So they still have to do this, but it kind of pushes it off for a longer period of time.
I missed the bill hearing for this. This seems like very substantive changes. And is this blueprint language?
It is blueprint language, and
Right,
what
so-
happens is the amendments bring it back closer toward the original intent from what the original intent of the blueprint was versus what the amended, the bill would have done.
But the bill is striking blueprint language. I guess I'm looking here on page 5 of the bill, where it looks like you're striking the requirement that a county board select. Yeah, I guess, yeah, it looks like that whole section is being deleted.
No. So
Okay.
in this case, the bill would have taken out the requirement. The bill would have changed the blueprint in its original intent to require assistant principals on the career ladder to teach for 20% of their time. Instead of saying they had to teach for 20%, they would say they had to participate in classroom activity involving direct interactions.
Mhm,
That would be much further away from the original intent of the blueprint.
mhm.
These amendments bring it much closer to what the original intent was, which was to lead academic instruction for students in classrooms, small groups, or one-on-one interaction.
Yeah.
The other part of that was some clarity that when an assistant principal does that, they're not interpreted to be teachers of record for purposes of other parts of the blueprint. That's that part.
Right.
So the second part was the bill would have struck this requirement that was established in the blueprint that locals could only select from this group on the career ladder to write curriculum and assessment items and develop model lessons.
Mhm,
That would have been stricken.
right.
So this amendment brings it back closer to what the original intent was by saying, no, you still have to do this, but you don't have to begin doing this until the career ladder is well established. And that is determined by the Accountability and Implementation Board.
But there's still I don't know, maybe I'm not seeing the redacted version of the bill. Hold on.
So those brackets are all redacted. It might be hard to see, but they are all redacted.
No, um. Okay. Okay, so you've crossed those out. Okay, I got it now. Thank you.
Any additional questions on the amendments? Okay, did we move those amendments yet? Nobody moved those amendments. Anybody want to move the amendments? Okay, Senator Watson, Senator Washington is second. All in favor of the amendments, raise your hand. All opposed? Amendment carries. We've got the bill on in front of us, Senate Bill 791 as amended. All in favor or discussion? Okay, all in favor? All opposed? 791 as amended carries. Let's go back up. Yes, yeah.
Moved and second to move the whole bill.
Sorry, move the bill.
Oh, I thought we did.
And second,
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, I thought you were the motion on the, but that's a,
I may be.
okay.
Is it too late to add my name as a sponsor?
No, it's not too late. Anybody want to be first? Well, yeah, okay, we haven't done, I obviously skipped ahead too quickly. So yes, we're still back on amendment stage. So therefore, anybody want to be amended onto this bill, raise your hand. Okay. Okay, it looks like everybody. Okay, so that amendment, that sponsor, see, it was good. It's a good thing I jumped because everybody now is on and you can brag about it. Okay, now we have the bill as amended on the table, and you, Senator Augustine, moved favorable on the bill as amended. Senator Watson's a second. So we've got 791 in front of us, favorable motion and a second. All in favor, raise your hand, all you sponsors. Senate Bill 791 as amended carries. Let's go back to Senate Bill 327, Senator Elfreth. We're just gonna now go straight down the list from this point forward, okay? Senate Bill 327, April.
Right, Senate Bill 327, hunting, wildlife conservation and outdoor recreation, funding, promotion, management, licenses, permits, and stamps. This bill establishes the Wildlife Conservation Education and Outreach Program within the Department of Natural Resources to, in general, increase outdoor recreation and stewardship, hunting, and wildlife conservation. The bill also, 1, increases fees for several hunting licenses, stamps, and permits. 2, establishes a resident and non-resident Sika deer stamp and related fees. 3, authorizes qualified non-resident college or university students to purchase a resident hunting license. 4, codifies fur bearer permit fees. And 5, repeals a prohibition against migratory game bird hunting on Sunday. Bill also alters Maryland's recreational use statute, requires the Department of Natural Resources to work with the Maryland Department of Agriculture to develop a plan to address deer overpopulation in the state, and establishes a new reporting requirement for the Department of Natural Resources. There are amendments in your bill packet. So those amendments appear, the reprint starts on page 16. Amendments themselves start on page 13. These are amendments from the bill sponsor, Senator Elfreth. Cut off a lot of debate by starting by saying that these amendments strike the language in the bill authorizing the Sunday hunting of waterfowl. They also add language prohibiting the hunting of captive raised waterfowl on Sunday in certain regulated shooting grounds. The amendments increase the fees for waterfowl outfitter and waterfowl hunting licenses. Strike language requiring the deer overpopulation plan required in the bill to include the feasibility of hunting on state land on Sunday, and add language requiring a portion of federal funding increases that are attributable to the license fee increases in the bill to be used for the creation and funding of a farmer cost share program for the planting of buffer crops.
Okay, any questions or discussion about the amendment? Senator Gallion.
Thank you. I just got a text this passed out of House Committee unanimously. I'm just wondering, is this lined up exactly with what the House is doing? Do you know? I know there's been a lot of back and forth about this. Has been held. There's been a lot of discussions. Do you have any idea? You may not know that, but
I have not seen what they actually passed today. I saw what came out of subcommittee, and I would say the only difference is that the amendments proposed by Senator Elfreth include that license increase for the outfitters and that prohibition on Sunday hunting on the regulated shooting grounds. I do not believe that is in the House amendments, but everything else I think is the same.
So in other words, there would still be statewide Sunday hunting for the other stuff allowed for the waterfowl
No,
in this.
no, in in these amendments and the House amendments prohibit Sunday hunting of waterfowl. Or would keep the current prohibition of on Sunday hunting for migratory waterfowl.
Okay,
This would go a step farther and prohibit the regulated shooting areas as well from operating on Sundays. What this Senator Elfrid's amendments would prohibit in the regulated shooting grounds where it is currently possible in some counties,
Senator Simoneau?
or all counties maybe.
So just clarification on the differences. I know some came in and opposed it, the guides and all that. Is that the fee that's being put into this amendment to increase that was not in the original bill? So I think it went from 300 something up to 425 at the end. Is that the target of those fee increases?
The outfitters, these amendments would include an increase on the license fee for the outfitters.
And it would also limit what they could currently do on Sunday, I guess, in some counties?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, any additional questions on the amendments? Anybody want to move the amendments? Senator Lewis Young, Senator Hester second. We'll do a roll call on this one on the Elfrith amendments. Lemuria,
Senator Kagan,
Aye.
Senator Kagan, yes. Senator Augustine. Senator Augustine, yes. Senator Gallion.
I'm gonna vote no on the amendment, just explain my vote on this. I think we're now banning something that's currently allowed. So I have an issue with that, so I'm gonna be a no.
Senator Gallion, no. Senator Watson. Senator Watson, yes. Senator Lewis Young. Senator Lewis Young, yes. Senator Brooks.
Yeah.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Hester.
If the two bills are different, they go to conference committee, right?
yeah, well,
We have a chance to amend the House version and vice versa. They have the chance to amend the Senate version. But if they continue to be different, then it would go to conference. We will consider the House version when it comes over here.
Okay, yes.
I'm gonna say no, just to explain my vote. We didn't have a discussion about removing a right that's already had, and that's been voted by different by individual delegations, and yeah, that was considered by this body, so I have to be a no on that, on the amendment. I like the first part of the amendment, but the second part negates it.
All right, Senator Simoneau.
Yeah, I would just explain my vote. I was ready to vote for this amendment, but then it seems that those who came in opposed the vote are now being included through the amendment, and it seems like they're penalizing them. So I'm going to vote against it.
Okay, Senator Simoneau, no. Senator Feldman.
yes, the amendment does carry. We now got the bill as amended. Yes, yeah,
I was originally on this as a co-sponsor. I'd like to be amended off as a
Okay.
co-sponsor, please.
that's fine. So that will be an additional amendment. Senator Gallion will be removed as a sponsor from the bill. Anybody else in that category? Okay, seeing none, we do have the bill as amended on in front of us, Senate Bill 327. Is there a motion favorable on the bill? Yeah, sure. Senator Hester.
I just was wondering if we could hold this just for one day.
Discussion about the hold. Obviously, we've got the crossover situation, but anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay, I think this is one that enough discussion, pushback. I think it's appropriate that we hold it till tomorrow. So we'll be 2 sessions tomorrow, don't forget. And I think that's probably the best way to handle this one at this point. But we did vote on the amendment. So the only thing when we get back tomorrow will be the bill as amended that's in front of us. So,
I did have an amendment.
and obviously for additional amendments, that's true.
So I had one today. I might have one tomorrow too.
Fair enough. Okay. Everybody know where we are? we have an amendment? Other people may have amendments. Let's move down to Senate Bill 470. And that's April.
Right. Senate Bill 470, Natural Resources, Land Conservation, Establishment of Goals and Programs, the Maryland the Beautiful Act. This bill, you might be unfamiliar because we are secondary on this bill. It had a primary in budget and tax. The bill establishes land conservation goals for the state, a 40 by 40 land conservation implementation grant program, a local land trust revolving loan program, and specified annual stewardship grants. So this did pass budget and tax, favorable with amendments. The amendments are in your bill packet. Those amendments begin on page 32, the reprint. The amendments change the bill came in with mandated appropriations. This strikes those and just says that the governor may appropriate money to the various funds set up by this bill. But the budget and tax amendments also authorize the use of Maryland's transfer tax over attainment in fiscal year 2025 to be used to provide funding for the revolving loan program.
Okay, so B&T voted, were there amendments? I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yes, so those
Okay.
were the budget and tax.
Oh, the budget tax.
Yeah,
yeah,
it strikes the
okay.
mandatory appropriation and allows the overattainment from fiscal year 2025 transfer tax to be used to set up this fund.
Okay, so yes,
Since we didn't have this, and I would just pulled up testimony really quick, there's like 30 for it and 20 against it. Can I hold just to take a look and see what people are saying? Since we didn't have a public hearing in this committee.
okay. Of course, we're second, so it's, typically we, honestly, none of the seconds would ever have hearings on any bills, but I'm obviously a little bit concerned
Or
about.
did we have anybody attend it?
I did.
Yeah, Senator
I was-
Kagan was assigned, so could maybe particular questions, Senator Kagan sat through the hearing, but
Just all the opposition?
There was a lot of enthusiasm for this bill and Senator Elfreth did a great job presenting it. The question was about the cost and Shelton A sort of addresses that.
yep, Senator Watson.
Senator Kagan. So with the attainment of the conservation spots, how do they determine where in the state those occur? And just let me give you my context. We saw a presentation where it was depicted, say that Prince George's County was cutting down more trees than any other county, right? And Prince George's County is behind many other counties in terms of development, business, and those types of things.
Mhm.
And so if we're going to put a cap on how much land needs to be reserved, I don't want to unintentionally limit the ability for my county to grow. Can you give some insight to that 30% and then 40% goal?
April, can-
These are, I would call these are policy goals. There's no specific program in this bill that's going to limit development in any part of the state. It's just sets a broad policy for the state that says we as a state are going to try to preserve its 30% of the total state by 2030 and 40% of lands in the state by 2040. For reference, the state currently has about 29% of the state land under conservation. So again, it's just a policy call that's sort of the goal setting that's occurring in the bill. The substantive pieces of the bill mostly have to do with directing funding and support towards local land trust that purchase conservation easements or purchase property outright to put under conservation. So this is not the Forest Conservation Act. It's not setting up any limits on development. This is really about sort of funding primarily the private conservation, private land trust conservation programs.
if I could just add. So thank you for the question and I can't find my notes, so I'm going from brain cells, which are aging. But one of the examples she talked about, the senator, the sponsor talked about was that property may be affordable, and then as soon as it's public, that it's available, the prices go way up. And so people who want to conserve the land are kind of priced out of it. And so by being able to kind of level the playing field and make sure that it's more, that the information is more accessible with aspirational goals. So that was something she talked about, is affordability of coveted land. But I deferred to April, but that was something she talked about.
No question. And you got it. I'm getting up the learning curve pretty quick here, Senator. So today I received an email from the Board of Public Works that DNR is committing $411,000 in program open space funding. So it looks like someone who has land, instead of selling to a developer, reached out to the state, and the state is going to purchase that land, 52.5 acres, and then make that open space, right? Is that what this is considered in terms of conservation? Would that land be considered conservation?
And again, these are broad goals.
Yeah.
But yes, so land that is included, that is purchased, included in parklands or wildlife lands, that would count towards achieving this goal, but also land that is preserved, for example, under the Agricultural Land Preservation Fund would potentially be, preserved in this goal. Anything that is, any program that is sort of preserving lands as green space would count towards this. And I take that back. I'm not sure we have a separate agricultural land preservation goal, but anything that's preserving lands in their natural state, whether it's a state program, local program, private program, would count towards this.
And so once it goes into this category, is there any mechanism to reverse that if the need sees fit by, say, local government?
Generally not. So generally the way that these lands are being preserved is through either being, purchased by the state, and that typically, or local government, is typically remains parkland forever. Sometimes it's through conservation easements, where again, the property owner is selling them the right, that land does, once it's under easement, is
All right.
cut off from development.
All right. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Senator Gallion.
Thank you. So I've been on that joint subcommittee with Project Open Space and Ag Land Preservation. And I believe it was last year or the year before, we had a bill that changed, it basically pushed back the date on some of our goals for ag land preservation. So because we haven't been able to, with it, mainly I think it was a funding thing where, I think there's a desire to have some of these farms preserved, but I forget what how many acres the goal was. But how does this bill kind of play in with that? I'm just trying to get it all, see how it all meshes together, so to speak.
You know what, and I'm sorry, and again, because we're secondary on this, so I have not looked closely at this bill in a while. I'm looking at the definition of conserved now. It would include agricultural land, because the bill defines conserve as land that is permanently protected from development through purchase, donation, a perpetual conservation or open space easement, or fee ownership in order to preserve the cultural, historical, ecological, or agricultural value of the land. So again, it doesn't directly necessarily, it's not necessarily kicking more money towards those agricultural easements, but that land that is preserved under an agricultural easement would count towards this, again, just sort of general policy goal of conserving land.
So this could help us also reach our ag land preservation goals, this bill.
It would be encouraging the same overall thing. Again, the substantive pieces of this bill are largely around providing support to local land trusts for the projects that they're doing. I'm not sure how much they're sort of involved in the agricultural space. But yes.
Okay, and then just
Big picture, yes.
one final question. You said we're secondary on this. What was the vote in the committee in B&T? Does anybody know? I can't find it on the laptop.
Lemuria, do you have that? Did they send it to you?
It was a unanimous vote. Okay, guys, here's what I think. We had a unanimous vote out of B&T. We're second. It went from a shall to a may. So I think we need to roll at this point. So we have the B&T amendments in front of us. Is there a motion? Okay, Senator Lewis Young, second from Senator Augustine. All in favor of the budget and tax amendments, raise your hand. All opposed, those amendments carry. Is there a motion on the bill as amended? Senator Lewis Young, Senator Augustine. So just to be clear, we've got Senate Bill 470 as amended in front of us. Let's do a roll call since there was a little pushback here and then.
All right, Senator Kagan.
Aye.
A
Senator
little pushback.
Senator Kagan, yes. Senator Augustine. Senator Augustine, yes. Senator Gallion.
Yes.
Senator Gallion, yes. Senator Watson. Senator Watson, yes. Senator Lewis Young.
Yes.
Senator Lewis Young, yes. Senator Brooks.
Yes.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Hester.
Yes.
Senator Hester, yes. Senator Washington.
Yes.
Senator Washington, yes. Senator Simoneer.
Yes.
Senator Simoneer, yes. And Senator Feldman.
Yes. There wasn't as much
Yes.
pushback as I thought. Okay, before we go to the virtual learning bill, let's brainstorm in here a little bit based on sort of the commentary on back on 327. Senator Hester, you have a thought on how we might adjust that bill to address some of the concerns that were raised?
Yes, so I've been messaging with the bill sponsor and I told her there was one piece of her amendment that I felt, was slightly controversial and we never talked about during the hearing. That is the part that would ban the Sunday hunting for everyone. So I think if we now have her amendments on the bill, if I can make a conceptual amendment to redact that one policy change, and then I did have another amendment, but I think that would eliminate the concern that I felt in the committee room, and she would be okay with that amendment.
Okay, we just want to be clear. So when you talk about that one other, just be clear, everybody know what we're talking about, that other policy call. Yes, Senator Lewis Young.
Would just like to refer what it is we are redacting. It is my understanding that there is this organized or a business that shoots ducks out of a cannon, and for $700 you can shoot them. Is that what it is we're redacting?
Yes.
Just
Okay.
wanted to make sure.
Well, okay. What were you going to say?
Just, yes, the amendments would have prohibited them from doing that only on Sundays, which they do currently do on Sundays.
Okay, any further discussion about the amendment? Yeah,
Isn't it more, it's not just that. I mean, that was an example, but is there other wouldn't it ban all?
No, so
No.
her amendments, the amendments, and you can look at the language, it's on page
Yeah.
27. Her amendments of the department may not authorize the hunting of captive raised waterfowl on Sunday in a regulated shooting ground that charges a fee to shoot or hunt captive raised waterfowl.
It's pretty specific.
Yes, currently that does occur on Sundays. Her amendment as introduced would,
okay. So
So if I could
yeah,
just
go on.
speak to the amendment. So the question is about like the whole bill or this little piece of the bill. And in this committee, we've always said, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And this bill is very, very important for the fees that it's going to raise to support DNR. Like, this is really important, for the state. We did not specifically talk about this, and I want to be clear, I do not support the shooting of ducks out of cannons. However, I don't want this bill to sink because of this amendment. I think it will be very controversial on the floor, and I think that it's a really good bill, and we should move it as good rather than perfect.
Yeah, well, we're, discussing, seeing if we can rectify and revive it, but if we can't, we can't, but that's why we're here to discuss it. So Senator Gallion
Yes,
and Senator Lewis Young.
I know whatever we pass here, we can have concurrences and different things with the House, but I would really like to be able to take a look at what they just passed unanimously on the House side and then potentially offer an amendment here to line it up here with what they passed unanimously out there. So, I mean, it sounded like they passed a day. I'd love to have a day like that original hold we just was granted earlier to look at that so we can if we can see it.
Okay, Senator Lewis Young.
I have another question. If you're outlawing hunting, regular hunting of waterfowl and wildlife on Sunday, but you're allowing this business to continue, aren't you just converting or driving more business to that business for those that can afford the $700?
Is that directed to April? I'm not-
Anyone that
I-
can
I-
answer.
I would just say that that is the current state of affairs. Currently, hunting of migratory game birds is all out prohibited in the state. There are species, you can hunt certain turkey and certain other things on some Sundays in some counties. But migratory game birds are currently the only across the board prohibition for Sundays.
Okay.
Okay, Senator Hester, can I just ask you before we make an executive decision here on all this? This other amendment you're referring to, just so we have some context, okay, what's the general nature of it?
It's,
Just so we know.
I mean, because we haven't like raised the fees and there's a financial aspect to this bill, there's a bunch of reporting, not a bunch of reporting, a few reporting things that we just wanted to have a study on. And so it was a reporting amendment.
What page, what number?
Sorry, I must have missed that.
I can read it. If you give me a second, I can.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, well, committee council obviously hasn't had the benefit of reviewing it. Okay, putting all this together, candidly, let's go back to the original hold. I know it's not, ideal here, but I think there's enough acrimony back and forth with other amendments that council doesn't have yet. And this policy call prohibition about ducks being shot out of cannon. So putting all this together, I think it's best if we defer this conversation to the next voting session tomorrow. And I think that's kind of where I think we're at, unless somebody has a strong view otherwise. Okay. Okay, let's talk about virtual learning next. We've got Senate Bill 610.
So do you want to do SB 913 first? And
Well, yeah, you told me it's not, okay,
I didn't
let's,
say it was low hanging fruit.
okay,
It's
let's go to
easier with virtual
913 and then
schools,
the
but
only
it's
bill
not.
left on for us today will be virtual learning. So let's go to Senator Gazzoni's 913
Okay.
and then
if
we'll
you-
go to 610.
If you would like to look at the reprint, it begins on page 57 in your packet. So SB 913, publicly funded full-day pre-kindergarten program, Tier 1 child alteration of definition. This emergency bill alters the definition of Tier 1 child within the publicly funded full-day pre-kindergarten aid program to also include a child who is 3 or 4 years old, 1 with a disability, 2 who is a homeless youth, or 3 who is from a home in which English is not the primary spoken language. Correspondingly, these children are included in the pre-kindergarten enrollment count for purposes of determining the program amount to be funded by the state and local governments beginning in fiscal 2023. There is one amendment. It starts on page 55 with the reprint on page 57. I think there was some confusion in the drafting of this bill. And so these amendments clarify and kind of do what the sponsor intended. So it alters the definition of pre-kindergarten enrollment for purposes of the pre-kindergarten enrollment funding formula to include priority tier 2 children. And these children are children with disabilities, homeless youth, and these children where English is not the primary spoken English. It doesn't redefine tier 1 child except to add children who are homeless youth. And the purpose of that is that local education agencies or county boards were encouraged to start enrolling children in these categories in these pre-K enrollment spots. But there was no funding for these children who were put in these spots. But they don't want this, and state funding for tier 1 children is a greater share than for other tiered children. They want to include state funding for these children who are otherwise not getting any sort of funding for at the moment. So the bill is basically saying tier 1 child, which now includes homeless youth, but also includes funding for these children who are considered priority under tier 2 children. So that is what the whole purpose of this is, to do that, is to get state funding for these children in fiscal year 2024 without having a fiscal impact beyond that. And then it also prioritizes these children for pre-K enrollment slots, which is the other part of the bill here. It's kind of a hard one to explain, but let me find the page here. So on page 63 of your packet, it shows that beginning in the 2022-2023 school year, Tier 1 children who are 3 or 4 years old, and these priority children who are children with disabilities, homeless children, and children where English is not the primary language may be enrolled. So it does that two pieces. It does the funding piece and it does the enrollment piece. The other part of this amendment involves, what is it? Oh, yes, it involves, I've lost my thing. I'm sorry. So it exempts certain schools in the community enrollment. I'm sorry, I got myself confused here. So currently, certain schools in the community eligibility provision, the community eligibility provision is a program regarding feeding programs that allows high poverty schools and districts to serve breakfast and lunch at no cost to all enrolled students without collecting household applications. And these applications give data to the school to determine which children are eligible for free or reduced price meals. A school system or a school that adopts a community eligibility provision basically says there's a high enough percentage of these children that instead of collecting this data and going piecemeal, everybody will just get free food in these programs. So currently I don't know what I did with that, sorry. When it comes to the definition of, I'm sorry, I lost my place. It says that schools that 100% adopt the community eligibility provision do not have to submit these forms for purposes of the community eligibility enrollment provision funding. I'm sorry, I apologize.
Good, we got time.
I just want to make sure I understand the funding formulas correctly. Oh, compensatory education enrollment. That's what I apologize. So that means there's two funding formulas that are being modified here. The compensatory education enrollment, to calculate that, it includes determining the number of children in these programs. What this would do is exempt these particular schools from having to file these particular forms. And the determination for this program is made in other ways. So the number of children is calculated through other methods instead of through these forms. So I apologize for confusing the committee. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Senator Simonek.
So when they apply for the 100%, can you go over again what the school has to have as a minimum? In other words, 90% of their students are receiving this, so they say it's close enough. We can go to 100. Is there a low bar that they have to meet?
I don't know what the exact percentage is, but I'm sure it's over 50%.
And the purpose, we've had some bill hearings on this in the past. The purpose, I think, partially is they didn't want to, highlight some of the kids getting it and some not getting it, and the stigma associated with that.
Oh, I apologize. It's 40% or higher.
So 60% don't qualify for it, but they can get 100%. It just seems like a low percentage to boost it up to 100%. Get
So that's federal law. We cannot change that here.
federal law is what?
That percentage of when the school or the district can adopt into the community eligibility provision.
And that provision is to get the whole school.
Correct.
And so federal law says at 40% you can do that.
Yes.
All right.
Any additional questions? Again, we're on the amendments. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was trying to cross-check the amendments to Mako's testimony. So does this cover the funding issue that they were raising in their testimony?
I have not looked at it, but I believe it does.
They said, were the committee to agree to expedite the expansion of Tier 1 pre-K eligibility, counties believe the bill should ensure that the state pays the full share of the public subsidies for the additional Tier 1 students added under the bill.
Well, it doesn't pay the full share. It pays the state share as it pays for other Tier 1 children.
Any additional questions for Stacy on the amendments? Okay, seeing none.
Move the amendments.
Mr. Augustine moves favorable. Senator Kagan. Let's do a roll call.
All right, Senator Kagan.
Aye.
Senator Kagan, yes. Senator Augustine.
Yes.
Senator Augustine, yes. Senator Gallion.
Yeah.
Senator Gallion, yes. Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Watson, yes. Senator Lewis Young.
Yes.
Senator Lewis Young, yes. Senator Brooks.
Yes.
Senator Brooks, yes. Senator Carozza.
Yes.
Senator Carozza, yes. Senator Hester. Senator Hester, yes. Senator Washington.
Yes.
Senator Washington, yes. Senator Simonaire.
Yes.
Senator Simonaire, yes. And Senator Feldman.
Yes, the amendments carry. Now we have on the table Senate Bill 913 as amended. Is there a motion? Is there a motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion in favorable second. All in favor of Senate Bill 913 as amended, raise your hand. All opposed, that bill carries unanimously, which brings us to our final bill of the day, Senate Bill 610. Stacy.
I can promise you, I understand this bill a whole lot better. So just to begin, you all have a lot of materials in front of you, so I just want to explain the purpose of that. The chair has decided the committee will move Senate Bill 610. Multiple bills were filed on this particular topic, and it was determined that this would be the appropriate bill to start with. So in front of you, you have a copy of Senator Hester's bill on the same topic, SB 829. And no, this was provided last Friday. So there was two bills. There was a chart that says virtual schools at the top. And today you've received an additional one from Senator Washington, which talks about that. Yes. Right. So the purpose is that in case if you want to look at the language we're referencing, because most of the changes come from Senate Bill 829, then there are page numbers and lines references for you, so you can look at that language specifically instead of just hearing it. So in general, for the benefit of members who have not been on this committee until this year, there are three primary components to this
Just
bill.
I don't mean to interrupt, I'm very interested in this. I got to go upstairs and do a 5-minute presentation. I will be back. Don't leave. Well, I think I'm going to go do my thing right now. I'm going to present it and come back down. I mean, we could take a quick 5-minute break if you, okay, if you don't mind, I'll do that. Okay, let's take a 5-10 minute break.